Budget hearings meeting for Monday, October 28th, 2019 will please come to order, and the clerk will call the roll.
Calling the roll, Ms. Simon. Ms. Simon is absent at the moment. Ms. Baker. Here. Mr. Miller.
Here.
Mr. Tuma. Mr. Tuma is absent at the moment. Mr. Gallagher.
Here.
Mr. Schron.
Here.
Ms. Conwell. Mr. Jones.
Here.
Ms. Brown. Here. Ms. Stevens. Ms. Stevens is absent at the moment. Council President Brady.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you very much. Do we have anybody signed in for public comment?
We do, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Liu.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the committee.
Good afternoon. Glad to be here. Back in 2017, on the day for all the judicial services to come up here to present their budget needs, I learned something very, very important. Our judicial system being complained by general public. Yes, there are flaws. There definitely will have a room for improvements. But our judicial system is not really properly funded. That's a main concern, especially our Public Defender's Commission. From what I heard at that time, I felt this particular office, just like a homeless shelter in our county, having nothing. But people expect them to do everything. This is not fair, but I'm glad our county council members all had agreement that this is a time to make a change to improve. So now, last week, Mr. Mark Stinnen stopped by again to let us know there's a Ralph occupying lots of space. Well, same thing, homeless shelter, we have a Richard Carr to conduct ridiculous renovation to ruin the shelter. So we have more improvements to make, more progress to make. Not only go Cavs, also go Public Defender Commission. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Has anybody else signed in?
No, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. And so today we are going to continue to use the general questions that we've been using, and presenters are requested to fold the answers into their presentations. The questions are: is the staffing level in your department the same as in previous years? Could you use some additional staff, or could you get by with less staff? Second, what additional funding requests did you make for this budget, and were any approved? Which were denied? And third, if additional funding were available, what are the 3 top areas to which you would provide additional funding? And copies of the general questions are on the presentation platform. Second, preliminary item is that, as everybody knows, tomorrow will be the last day for the departmental hearings portion of this process. And after that, we begin the process of distilling all the information that we've heard and coming up with recommendations for any changes or amendments to the budget. And to facilitate that process and be able to compile a working list for our consideration, I would like to ask anyone who has recommended amendments, whether it be colleagues or administration, to submit them to me with a copy to Trevor McAleer by a week from tomorrow, Tuesday, November 5th, by the end of the day, so that we and they can be submitted in concept. If you still have additional details to work out and cost determinations to achieve or such things, We can gather a little bit more information later, but for the November 5th day, we just want to know what the field is of items that we're considering. So I would appreciate everybody's cooperation with that request. At this point, we will call forward Brandy Carney to make the overview presentation for Justice Services and Public Safety.
Good afternoon, Council. Brandy Carney, Chief of Public Safety and Justice, which after the last year, I'm sure all of you know me, but I think today should be fairly easy for myself. Just wanted to point out, as most of you know, tomorrow each of the leaders within the Public Safety and Justice cluster will be in front of you to present their detailed budget, and they can also answer any of the questions for you. For some background information, the presentations within the Public Safety and Justice cluster include the Sheriff's Office, the Medical Examiner, the Department of Public Safety and Justice, as well as the Clerk of Courts. And then further, the Department of Public Safety and Justice includes 5 independent agencies, which are the CCOMS 911 Center, the Witness Victim Service Center, Emergency Management, our Grants and Fiscal Division, and our Admin Division. The Public Safety and Justice total budget is just over $175 million in front of you and includes $146 million in general fund. We also have some levy funds, state and federal grant funds, and a number of special revenue funds, such as the 911 wireless fund and the $5 fee for tickets under the Sheriff's Department that's received. Overall, I'm happy to say that as a cluster, we're happy with the per budget that's presented in front of you. At this time, we don't see any issues that it presents that would require eliminating any existing programs, initiatives, or services. The Sheriff's Office and Medical Examiner's budget both include a proposed increase, which I think will both have visible and noteworthy effects that we'll see in the year to come ahead. The Sheriff's Department specifically includes a request for increasing deputies for an additional 35 deputies, which would take the budgeted number to 215 deputies. One of the main operational items the sheriff will use that is to help support the courts for safety and security within the courts using those deputies. We've had a difficult time with all of the different locations that the sheriff's office supports with the deputies for safety and security. And so I really think this 35 will be great to truly meet those needs in the Justice Center as well as buildings throughout the county and for county safety. In addition, we also have a request in the budget for jail efforts overall. Specifically, some of the new contracts, such as covering the Metro Health contract that was completed this year and other initiatives with the work that's being done within the last year within the jail. We also are currently budgeted for 675 correction officers, and the budget request in front of you would increase that number to 725. The positions will allow us to supplement work and operations within the jail. The jail administrator, as well as the warden and other supervisors there, are looking to cross-train many of the COs within the jail. What's happened recently is a lot of the individual posts, as they call, aren't cross-trained. So if you have a number of call-offs in one particular area, it's difficulty filling either that area or filling it with someone who has the expertise needed for that area. So they're working on providing training to cross-train throughout the county, which these additional positions would also be used for. If you have a call-off the day of, for example, we've recently had shifts where 30-plus people have called off. It's difficult to have that many people anywhere readily available. But with the increased request in front of you, we feel like It'll help us on the overall operation as well as some of the initiatives that have been in front of you. The medical examiner office is also requesting an increase in their budget. Dr. Gilson will speak to you about tomorrow. It is for personnel. That personnel will work in the lab to to handle the trace evidence or DNA and toxicology. One of our main priorities is reducing the jail population, and so having those positions that can work and process the evidence that's in front of them, that evidence then gets to the court to be used and further allows for a reduction in jail population because we don't have those inmates waiting in jail waiting to receive some of the results of that testing. Some of the new initiatives proposed in the budget, I just quickly wanted to mention the $1 million that's proposed for bail reform. It's not under my public safety and justice budget, but I absolutely support it. I'm happy to hear. I think it's great what the courts are moving to do and expand. And bail reform is obviously a priority. We'd like to continue and will stay an initiative throughout the coming years. Secondly, the diversion center. $2.5 million for diversion planning. We are working with a group of stakeholders to address diversion planning. So a part of centralized booking, when people are arrested, rather than diverting those individuals to jail that might have a severe mental illness or an addiction problem, truly get them the services and help they need, diverting those individuals up front rather than in the jail. And so this group of stakeholders is actively looking to see how we can support that effort, and that money that's requested the budget will go a long way in moving that effort forward. The final two agencies under my cluster that are not requesting increase, the two increases, like I said, was the Sheriff's Office and Medical Examiner. The Department of Public Safety and Justice Services, as well as the Clerk's Office, actually have a 5% overall reduction. However, to answer some of your questions, Councilman Miller, we do feel that as long as no large new initiative comes on that we're not aware of now, that we can still maintain our operation with that 5% reduction that's been proposed. So again, in closing, myself as well as the directors who will be in front of you tomorrow are happy with the budget that's been proposed in front of you. And I'm happy to take any questions if you have them for me.
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, could you please provide us a copy of what you just presented?
Yes, sir.
And, yes, and send it electronically to Jean, and she can circulate it around to the council.
I will do that, Councilman. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions? Councilman Gallagher, followed by Tuma.
Mrs. Carney, witness victim. Do we have more than one witness victim group program?
So the county has witness victim, we have just over 20 advocates to support domestic violence and other violence cases within the county. The prosecutor's office, for example, also has advocates that are assigned to their cases. There's an external entity, the Domestic Violence and Advocacy Center. They also work on services. Some do the larger trial cases, the larger felony trials. Some do different types of advocacy. So they all work together. There's multiple agencies, but they work together and divvying that up, if that makes sense.
Is there any need to have two?
Councilman, I would say, and I'm happy to provide you because we looked into this about 2 years ago. The Witness Victim Service Center that we have in the Department of Public Safety will take any case in front of them. Anyone that comes and asks for advocacy services. I know the prosecutor's office has a strong advocacy group under them. They are taking the cases that they are dealing with. But again, I can get more information on that, as well as have the director speak about that tomorrow.
Yeah, have them be prepared to talk about that.
Will do.
On the diversion center that you brought up, you said stakeholders. Who are the stakeholders you're speaking of?
So approximately 6 months ago, I would say in about May, the meeting started. It might have been a little prior to that. St. Vincent, Adams, Metro's at the table, the common pleas courts and judges, the mental health judges, the prosecutor's office, the public defender, the sheriff, large stakeholders with the criminal justice process have all been at the table.
And when does that come to council?
So the current contract for the Justice Center renovations that's been approved by this council with PMC, that group, there was just an addition added to that contract. I think it was passed in front of council a few weeks ago for an additional approximately $100,000. That is for the PMC group to also facilitate this current diversion process with those stakeholders.
Have them be prepared for tomorrow, and also, I don't want to
Sure.
take your time. Central booking, we'll discuss that tomorrow, and the requests. Okay?
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Simon and Mr. Tuma have joined the meeting, and Councilman Tuma is next.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I could not get out of my vehicle. It was too tight, so I couldn't get out.
Oh, the parking garages.
Yeah, it's tight today. So I was like Spider-Man.
One time I had to get in somebody's, because they were so close they couldn't fit. I had to get in their passenger side for them
Yeah.
and climb over and pull their car out.
So-
So I
Like,
get it.
it's like the Mayhem commercial.
Speaking of mayhem, so the 2.5 million for the diversion. So is that for capital improvements, or is that for paying some type of experts? What is that exactly for? I see we have
Sure.
Maggie coming up.
Maggie Keenan, Office of Budget Management. That's intended for operating expenses
For operating expenses. Operating expenses of what, a future?
of the diversion center
of the
itself.
diversion center itself.
At this time, based on some of the discussions they're having, I think the capital needs will be minimal than what we had originally thought, but there's nothing in the budget or contemplated at this time for capital.
Okay. All right. That's my question for now. So thank you. Thank you.
Councilwoman Conwell.
Through the chair to Chief Carney, is the cross training that you talked about, is it in the budget now?
Councilwoman, no, the particular cross-training is not, although most of those operations that they're cross-trained on will be done in-house. So the supervisory levels in-house that are within the particular area train the COs, for example, within booking, they'll train them within booking. So it's not external training, I guess is what I'm saying, for the majority of them. So it should be, the 725 number that's proposed should be able to cover those needs, but I can make sure tomorrow that the sheriff addresses that for you.
Okay, and then the clerk of courts, you talked about your department and clerk of courts, what, 5% reduction. Will the Nayla come here?
She
And
is,
talk
yes, the
about
clerk will
hers.
speak on her budget tomorrow, yes, ma'am.
Okay, so I'll ask her if she's happy with that. And I guess my final question right now is the remodeling and renovations that's going on with the jails currently, whose budget is that coming out of?
The current public works efforts that are being done within the jail, so there are dedicated staff from public works or their contractors that are assigned and working in their jail.
Is that coming out of Public Works capital funds? The capital funds that they put aside?
Sorry.
It's in the capital budget. It's general fund though, supported.
Okay.
There was no fund set aside.
So the work that's going on now, is it already being taken out of the budget that we have now?
It's being taken out of the current year budget, so we don't have to worry about that for next year, as far as I know.
And that was a question, my next question. Could you see if, I know they looked like they were almost done, but there were some other things that they suggested that they needed. And so I don't know if that's gonna go into this upcoming budget cycle.
No. So last we talked to them, everything that they need is covered in the current year budget, appropriation and cash, and we don't need to fund anything from the 2021 budget for the current, I want to stress though that that's the current renovations that are taking place right now. If something else is needed in the jail, it's not funded.
And one final question for Brandy. You said 675. I've heard that number a long time, and now you're increasing it to 725. Is that 725 going to come out this current budget going forward? The additional?
That would be the request, yes, in front of you to go forward. That's not current. We're just recently got to around 675, so it would be the proposed budget ahead, if approved, would be for the 725.
Okay, and so that addition for the correction officers, and then there's an ask for an additional deputies, 35.
That's correct. That's in the proposed budget in front of you, yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Councilwoman Simon.
Thank you. I have a question on your diversion statement about what the consultant's going to be looking to see, and you described one model of diversion. Is that something that you and the administration have already settled upon? Because there's different types of diversion, and you described a model in which somebody would be picked up and then taken, rather than being arraigned or booked or having some accountability through a drug court or recovery court, to go directly to a place where hopefully they'll stay to get treatment. Did you give that model as what the administration has settled upon, or is that just your understanding of what diversion may look like?
Sure, Councilwoman, excellent question. So I would absolutely say the group at hand has not decided on what the right model is, and that's why all the right people are, in fact, at the table. There's been lengthy discussion on, is it pre-arrest, is it post-arrest, all with valuable discussion to have that we're working through. So we are looking at scenarios now, and the group, the PMC group, is looking to collect data and present that data. But for clarity, that's just one of the options that we're looking at.
Okay. To Ms. Carney, I'd like to call up Ms. Keenan on this one as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's a follow-up question on the target level for the corrections officers. We heard pretty clear testimony previously that the money that's in the proposed budget was to maintain the current target level of 675 and keep the additional 60 on the payroll, with the possibility that we could go above that temporarily because we know there's turnover. But Ms. Carney's presentation seems to suggest a new target level of 725. So I'd like some clarification on does the proposed budget provide sufficient funds to maintain a continuous and ongoing level of 725, or is it 675?
So the proposed budget anticipates enough funding to cover 40 new corrections officers and 30 new law enforcement deputies. OBM doesn't track numbers of positions like head counts because that's pretty much irrelevant to us. So I don't know if it's 675 or 725. That's not something we even really concern ourselves with. All I know is that the budget anticipates however much they're funded for this year, plus 40 more in the jail. And as much overtime as we're currently spending. So if we hire more people and you can bring the overtime, there'll be additional money in the budget.
Director, how many positions the proposed funding level can continuously support is something I think we should concern ourselves with.
From a budgeting standpoint, OBM is not concerned with headcount because what we're more concerned with is how many hours it takes to get the job done. So we need to make sure that there's funding enough to provide coverage for a shift in the jail, whether that's one individual or two individuals that are covering it or one guy working overtime. That's up to the directors, and that's the discretion of the directors to know how they want to deploy the staff. OBM budgets a certain amount of money for personnel, and that's where our interest stops. We monitor FTEs. Headcounts are up to the directors in the Department of Human Resources.
I would just suggest intuitively that that I don't think the proposed funding level can sustain a continuous staffing at 675 because of or at 725 because of the fact that that while we're currently at or close to 675. We were well below that for most of the year. We operated much of the year around 600, so to add 40 positions to the funding level from 2019 is not going to get us to 725 on a continuing basis, in my opinion.
I would respectfully disagree with that. If you notice in our projections, we have a surplus in the jail budget. So we were significantly understaffed earlier in the year, but we've added millions to the budget this year. And if they're up to the 675 or wherever they're supposed to be right now, there's enough money in the budget to cover that. And that's what the 20 budget is based on, where they're supposed to be right now. And we have a large surplus in personnel in jail because we added more money than we could spend this year because we were only getting full staffing as we go along. The budget anticipates 40 new COs, not 50, 40.
Okay, I appreciate that update. And finally, for Ms. Carney, on the diversion center, do we have a target date for when we expect to have a plan in place as to what the model is going to be and where it's going to be located and et cetera?
Council President or Councilman Miller, I know that the current group, the facilitator group that I spoke about, is in the process of collecting data to individuals and stakeholders throughout the county. I don't know when that is expected to be presented to us soon, but I can get that information and have it for you tomorrow, sir.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other questions? Council Vice President Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'd just like to follow up on the line of questioning the chairman asked. We're not talking about the dollar amounts in the number of individuals. As the chairman said, we're discussing a rate. Mm-hmm. And so, and whether you can answer that question now or the sheriffs and those who come before us in the coming days, I would like a sense of the process from the moment a person makes a phone call to desire to be a CO mm-hmm. to the moment that they're actually trained and prepared to get the job. Because again, we're hiring at a rate. How quickly do we get them into the position and prepared versus how quickly individuals leave through attrition or whatever reason they leave? That rate has to be higher. The hiring process has to be obviously higher than the rate at which they quit if we want the staffing level to rise from 675, as the chairman said, we haven't been at for long, to get up to 725. So I just say that to say a line of questioning along understanding that process. Mm-hmm. Where can it be shortened or has it been shortened? Can you speak to it just in general?
Sure, Councilman. I can tell you when the executive and all of us had made it a priority for the hiring of COs at the beginning of this year, as did all of you. At that time, it was taking approximately 6 months from the time that a job had been posted until that correctional officer was actually on site here. HR has done a really great job, as well as the PRC and others, in really continuing to prioritize this hiring efforts, reaching out to other agencies, job fairs, etc. That process got down to about 2 or 3 months. And so obviously we'd like to maintain this process of keeping this number, but I think any of the directors within the county can say, it's difficult to always sustain, especially with an operation as big as correction officers, that 675 number, and you lose people. I would add another point. The last year, I know we've hired approximately 200 COs, but we've also lost 100 COs to your point of attrition and losing people. So we can provide more detail on that tomorrow, and I can have him speak to you. But I don't know how long we'll be able to maintain at this top level, because really everybody's made this their number one priority for the last 9 months.
You said you're not sure how long you'll be able to maintain at what
Being
level?
at completely full staff all the time for all positions staffed. But I'm looking at that as an operational number. I can respect and understand what you guys are saying as a numbers number. We just want to know operationally what that means in terms of head count and filling those positions.
So last, you also said you reduced the time from 6 months down to 2 to 3 months?
HR and the PRC were the large ones that, yes, for hiring of correction officers from the time it was posted till they started on staff.
Okay, so now you've done this, obviously you've shortened the time. Now the next question really is, has it assured that it's not too quickly? You know, you still have to prepare someone properly. I would like to know what was done to actually reduce the time. Was it more on the HR's end, or was it on the preparation to put someone in that position? I'd like someone prepared to speak to that as well.
Sure. And just to note, that doesn't include, for example, any of the training, none of that for that individual. That doesn't start until their first day. When I speak of, they do, their training starts that day. Their 6 weeks of training starts. So none of the training was hurt for accelerating this process. It was just making sure, for example, the minute the test comes down, or the minute a posting comes down, that almost immediately they had testing available. And then almost immediately those tests were reviewed and it was posted and able to interview. Everyone has done an excellent job making it a priority to keep that process moving every day.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Conwell.
Follow up through the chair to Chief Carney. Why not use the 715 number if only 40 are in the budget? Where did we get that 725 from?
So, Councilwoman, when Director Keenan said that, I have used 725, and we have in our operational meetings. Unfortunately, that was the first time that I heard the number 40, and so I'll make sure to go back. I know the sheriff planned on presenting tomorrow the numbers that we talked about, so we'll make sure to talk about it, or I'll make sure to talk to him in terms of, from a number perspective rather than head count.
And if we only need 675, the 715 would be still giving you 40 additional.
That's correct.
Can you let me know what comes from that?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
And Ms. Stevens has joined the meeting, and Ms. Brown is next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With regards to the hiring, Councilman Jones, just as the chair of HR, I do know that they added additional dates and did a job fair that allowed them to increase the staff, so that shortened the window. But my question was with regards to the witness victim service cases. They're continually going up, and I don't see that there's any request for an increase. So we are at sufficient resources for that.
Councilwoman Brown, yes, Jill Smilek is the manager of the agency, and Alex Pelham is the director that'll speak tomorrow. The cases have continually to come up every year. Approximately 3 years ago, we also opened the Family Justice Center, which many of you know is a one-stop shop for services that we have a huge role in. We're also increasing annually the cases there. But again, with the discussion with myself and the directors was that they are able to support the need with the numbers in front of you.
And can you just, for my clarification and understanding, what are some of the resources and services that are being provided? Because I hear differently when I'm in the community. So what exactly do they do?
So for the Family Justice Center, Councilwoman, is a number of different agencies. We term it as a one-stop shop. So it involves witness, victim, or other advocates. It involves police or other law enforcement agencies. It involves social support agencies. So if a victim goes to the Family Justice Center and wants to fill out a protection order, they can get help on site. If they want to talk to an advocate about the court process, if they want to talk to a detective that's available to talk about their case, it's one location, a one-stop shop, versus them having to go to multiple different locations and entities for for that information.
Are any of the dollars used for protection, witness protection?
Councilwoman, none of the witness victim budget dollars are used for protection.
Okay.
They're not.
All right, thank you.
Those would be covered, the sheriff's office support, but yeah, there's none in the witness victim budget. Thank you.
Vice President Jones.
Okay. I'd like to come back to the pre-booking conversation. With pre-booking, are you aware of how many bids for mental health are available in this community?
How many beds?
diversion.
Council,
Right.
sure. So I actually, the last few weeks myself, have actively been calling and just trying to get a handle on, resources available from all the different entities and providers, both on the addiction end as well as the mental health end. So that's actually information that I'm in the process of collecting. I'm sure there's agencies within the courts and throughout the county that also deal with many of these agencies regularly and have this information, but I too am reaching out to all of them to collect that information.
I understand the Chief of Staff is doing the same as well.
Correct, myself and Chief of Staff Mason, he had actually asked me to work on that. Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next, we have presenting on behalf of the General Division of the County Court of Common Pleas, the Administrative Judge, the Honorable John J. Russo. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, and Council President, Chair of the Finance Committee, Council members, thank you for allowing me an opportunity to speak here this afternoon. I do want to thank you for your public service. Being the checks and balances in Cuyahoga County is not easy, and so I thank you for your service. I also thank you for your last 6 years, as I'm going to be done and stepping down as the administrative presiding judge. And so I thank you for the opportunity to allow our court to continue to be a part of Cuyahoga County in so many ways, allowing us to be creative, allowing us to be cutting edge. And I thank you in tough times, knowing that a lot of times we took cuts in our budget, that you as a council was still there for us, still allowed us an opportunity to continue to be cutting edge. So thank you. On behalf of myself as the presiding judge, I do want to stand here and indicate that on behalf of the judges, the administrative judges, that I just want to support the additional monies that Judge Sweeney is going to come up here and ask for. So she's going to request some additional monies in her budget for the detention center and for some personnel in that detention center. And so I know she follows me, but I just want to be able to stand here and tell you that as administrative judges, that we fully support her request here this afternoon. And then, Chair, to answer your three questions, our current staff, we believe, is sufficient. We don't believe that we can cut any of the staff, and we're not asking for any additional staffing. If there was additional monies, we are not asking for any additional monies other than the three initiatives that we requested and that we're asking you to fund as part of the executive's budget that they've provided to us. Those three additional initiatives was the assigned counsel, the increase. Councilman Miller, you were involved with me back in 2014 when you did you did request on our behalf, and council approved 1/2 of those assigned counsel fees. We're asking that you allow that additional monies to be funded for this year. In addition to that, the additional monies for the expansion of our drug court to allow the high-risk felons to allow those to come into our drug court. And then also electronic monitoring would be our third initiative. So those are the three initiatives that we're asking that you fund in addition to the budget that's been presented to you by our executive. And so I stand ready to answer questions.
Okay, so you said the assigned counsel, the electronic monitoring, and
the drug court expansion, eligibility expansion.
And I was not clear, I was kind of hearing it both ways as to whether these three items are in the proposed budget that we have in front of us.
They are.
They are, okay.
Yes.
Okay, questions by my colleagues? Ms. Conwell.
I don't really have a question, just an ask. Can you explain just a little bit real quickly the expansion of the drug courts?
Yeah, so with the prosecutor and the public defender, we've had discussions over the last couple years about how do we increase the eligibility of the drug court for those who have prior felons or felonies that would have prohibited them from coming into the drug court, a high-risk offender who would not have an opportunity. So we're talking about someone who maybe has a aggravated robbery from 10 years ago would preclude them if they came before us on a case that had the potential to help them with an addiction. And they would have been currently not eligible. So we want to increase our eligibility, and by doing so, the funding that we're asking for would allow for additional staffing in order to do that.
Okay, so they could have did the crime with and been on a drug. Are you looking at those individuals that already had the addiction and they did the crime because?
Correct, yeah. So those who come in with a high-risk offense as well, and looking at that opportunity that I divert them into the program and not exclude them. It wasn't purposely exclusion, but it was part of that drug court grant. The drug court today doesn't have, the initial drug court is assumed in our budget right now, so it's not grant-funded money, so we're able to increase the eligibility. And so in order to do that, we've asked for additional funds to expand that drug court.
Okay, and the electronic monitoring will be?
So the electronic monitoring, initially we used special project monies for that, and we're asking to be part of our budget to allow for the electronic monitoring.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
And so, Your Honor, could you please provide us an electronic copy of the opening statement that you just made and send it to our clerk?
I will do
for
so.
distribution. And we have Councilman Schwan followed by Simon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Your Honor, a few years ago you came before this body, and I think we're referencing that the Chief Justice was going to be potentially recommending reduction of judges within Cuyahoga County based on the workload and limits based on their anticipation from down the Ohio Supreme Court. Can you give us an update as far as what the status of that is?
Yeah, and so to clarify, the chief was looking at possibly bringing in an outside, the National Center for State Court to do that. So it wasn't an assessment on reducing. It could have been reducing or increasing. What she was looking at caseload, and that never happened. So the chief never moved forward with that initiative. So it was never done.
Okay. The concept of reduction, though, I thought was something you said, I believe, a couple of years ago, that was something that the numbers would have supported a reduction?
I don't. And I would say that I never said that, or I don't believe I ever said that, because I wouldn't know unless that case that case plan took place with the Chief Justice. She was looking at possibly doing it statewide, but did not do it, so it was not funded by the Supreme Court. So there's no data to say that while cases have been fluctuating, I don't know if I can stand here. Well, I know definitely I couldn't stand here and say that because it's a legislative decision, not mine.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Councilwoman Simon.
Thank you. Thank you, Judge, for your work as administrative judge. And
Thank you.
We appreciate it. I just have a question about the efficacy and effectiveness of drug court. Just if you can take a minute, why it's important to fund this second drug court and the success story it truly is.
Yeah, so I would say it's actually, so it's this third drug court, because we have the recovery court with Judge Sinnenberg. So if you look at the initial drug court that Judge Mattia had, that would be this drug court spun off into another judge to allow additional eligibility. We still have a third one, which would be the MAT court, the medically assisted treatment court, and that's what Judge Mattia is currently running right now. Just initially received a 3-year additional grant funding for his court. And so it would be a third drug court that would allow for those who are coming into our court and putting them aside when they have a high felony, that prior conviction, it may have been 5 years ago, or they may have actually served their time on probation or to the institution and then come back, but you never have been treated for an addiction, and they find themselves back in our court with maybe a drug possession charge that's a felony case, and they would be excluded from the drug treatment program because of that 5 years ago felony that was an attempted aggravated robbery or what it may be. And so we want to be able to allow that to happen, and the prosecutor has spoke openly about that. The public defender has been an advocate, and the court has also stated a number of times that we wanted to move this way. There just wasn't funding for it, and so that's why we've come here today to ask for that additional funding.
Judge, why is it important, though, to have this third drug court? One's recovery, one's Judge Matias. Why is it important? Talk about the effectiveness of drug courts.
Yeah, so with Judge Mattia, I could speak individually too, running the Veterans Treatment Court. Our success rate, and again, the model of a treatment court isn't a model that's just developed and doesn't have stability and then at the end looking at results that are positive results. It truly rehabilitates. It truly gives the opportunity for an individual to have tools to use in their toolkit on a daily basis, as opposed to that recycling back in through the justice or into the jail and then back out on the street without having the tools to do so. So I always say, hey, it gives you additional tools in that tool belt. And clearly the drug courts that we have now, the efficiency and graduation rate, and then the recidivism. Again, Case Western continues to look at those recidivism even after they're off of probation. And the numbers are very positive for the citizens of Cuyahoga County. You're welcome.
So, Your Honor, among the strategic objectives described for common pleas in the budget book, it said one was advocate to decrease pretrial detention, and second, to provide pre-arrest diversion and other alternatives to decrease the number of mentally ill residents in jail. Can you tell me what the Common Pleas Court is currently doing to pursue these objectives?
Yes. So, Chair, I would say with respect to pretrial diversion, so that the next phase of pretrial diversion that we're looking at, if you had an opportunity, something I spoke about just recently. So if you can imagine the concept of an individual that's going to be charged with a felon coming in through a municipal court and having the Common Pleas Court there at that time, what we might call centralized booking, but it's truly not centralized booking because not everybody's involved. But we want to pilot in the Cleveland Municipal Court, where a large percentage of our cases come, an opportunity to be at the front door when they come into what would be just the misdemeanor arraignment room, that we can start to provide services, pretrial services, connections to treatment facilities, connections to the drug court, to the veterans court, to the mental health court, to connections for case planning for the mentally ill, medication, social workers. So those type of services being provided at the very initial time they have come into the system. We do that now through the first appearance docket, but that doesn't capture at the very beginning when they come into the municipal court. So that's what we're looking at piloting right now in the Cleveland Municipal Court with today Judge KJ Montgomery, who is the voice of the municipal courts. And again, she doesn't speak and make decisions for them, but she has constant interaction with them. And she and I are meeting soon so that we can talk about what that might look like in a suburban setting as well, which would create some complications because there's so many different jurisdictions and where we have to be. So dealing with pretrial services is important in that way for us. And then speaking with diversion. So as the diversion center was mentioned, and we are at the table in those discussions, I will say that diversion is a multiple, the definition of diversion is really, if you start to talk about it in diversion on an arrest or a diversion once they get into the justice system and charge. So there's different ways of diverting those who come in who might have a mental health issue. And I think Councilwoman Simon mentions, well, what are you looking at? And so I would say to you, that DLR, and one of the reasons they were chosen to come in is because they had a real strong mental health component of experts. And then I believe as Ms. Carney has come to you and indicated, the executive then came to you and asked for some additional money so they can do an evaluation of what would that look like. And there's many models around the United States on maybe just a police officer bringing the person into a facility and never really bringing them to the jail? Or what if they did commit a real crime and they're not just someone that's causing a nuisance? That nuisance today might be brought down to the Justice Center or brought down to a jail. So that nuisance might be diverted to a mental health facility that they never even reach the criminal justice system. And there may be some who do get charged and are in the criminal justice system, but still need mental health opportunities for us to touch them with treatment or with medicine. So there's different times that the mental health reach the criminal justice system even before they get charged. And so that total diversion is what I think we're looking at. And how does that fit into Cuyahoga County with the potential discussion of a new jail, potential discussion of a new or renovated justice center, and where would that fit in and what would it look like? And I think that's what we've asked DLR to do for us. So we don't know exactly what it would look like, but I believe it would be all encompassing. And I know that with our 5, to go back to your question then, the 5 judges that have mental health, specifically mental health defendants on their docket, you should know that every judge, not every individual who has mental health issues can be funneled to 5 judges. All 34 of us have mental health defendants on our dockets, and we work with those individuals as well. Social workers, and continuing to evaluate to see how we develop a case plan and how we get them back into the community with a case plan is something that we do on a daily basis.
Ms. Baker.
Thank you. I appreciate your testimony.
Thank you.
The electronic monitoring that has brought to question as to how they would be used, whether it's used for bail reform or whether it's used for probation. Can you tell me what your vision is in the use of electronic monitoring?
I'm going to take a number that I believe is about 65% today that we have on pretrial and the remaining that are on sentence from a judge. So currently that's the ratio that we use. We believe it's the diversion either way from the county jail. Any of those who were on after sentence electronic home monitoring may have been sent to the county jail for time to serve, whether it be local time under ILC or other forms of local incarceration. So we believe that those monitors are being used to still divert from the county jail and allow them to have home arrests in their home with an electronic monitoring.
So is it fair to say that the 65% and 35% is a percentage that you would like to see continue? And is there more dollars needed on one or the other?
So this is where I would say Judge Brendan Sheehan, I'm just going to kick it down the, no. I think, it's a good question. You know, I know that we're watching that number. We're encouraging judges that may have used electronic home monitoring for a sentence that may have not been appropriate, maybe felt maybe a comfort level instead of something else. I think we're looking at that post-sentence when we have a crime of violence, when we have a local incarceration that would have been given and we can give it in their home. And whether that's the percentage that we want to continue to use forward, I'm not able to answer that question at this time.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Vice President Jones.
Thank you. Judge, how many people in our county are incarcerated because they can't afford to pay fines or fees? Do you have a number?
I do not.
Could you speculate?
You're saying that are sitting in on a holder because of fines and fees?
Right.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you. I missed. I'm going to say on the felony level that it could be a 0% that are sitting in our. I think that's what I hear, and I apologize if I'm wrong. That may be held on a capias or a warrant because they owe money to the county or to anybody.
The heart of my question is bail reform. It is just the concept that individuals are being held, and they're unable to pay the bail that would allow them to be.
Okay, that was the question I originally was answering, and I apologize. So those who are unable to pay a bond and are sitting in the county jail, those would be a number I could tell you what those numbers are. I know there was some, for example, some comment that maybe 400 or 500 felony 4s and 5s are sitting in the jail on a bond that they can't make. When we went and actually looked at that, it was much less. But in fact, out of the 200 plus that were sitting, they had holders from other cases, holders from the PRC, a hold from adult parole, a hold from a municipal court, a hold because of a capias, they didn't come to a hearing. So that the reality was that the number of those who were in the county jail on low-level felonies that couldn't make a bond was much less than what the initial figure was given. It was a very, very low figure. And if you're asking how many of those are sitting in the county jail that don't have a warrant or a hold from another county, we could determine that number and provide that.
So let me just kind of broaden the question, and you can answer it in any way you'd like. The way I see it, the heart of the problem is overcrowding in that jail. We're trying to determine how many correctional officers we need, what size of a building to build, when at the heart of it you have a swelling and overcrowding of the population, and it's something we need to right size. My question to you is, speak to me what your thoughts are on bail reform and its part in it, and what does it look like to you? What would you advocate for?
Yeah, so Vice President, I would say first, my understanding is as all stakeholders continue, as I noted earlier, with the prosecutor and the public defender, with motions being filed for bond reductions and some of those bond reductions not being objected to, I think we're at capacity now, if not below, although I would have to go look at the number today. So I think we're relatively close to the capacity level and not over capacity. And then to answer your question with bail reform, I'm not naive to the fact that the movement in the state of Ohio and in the United States is a movement of no cash bond. And I've been forthright in trying to move the pendulum that way here in Cuyahoga County. This new process of evaluating cashless bonds that I spoke about just recently with the plain dealer is something that I've spoke to my bench about. And I know that the ability to look at figures around the United States on those individuals who do appear not having a cash bond is a high percentage, and I know there's success in other states. And I'd like to be a model here in Cuyahoga County of how those states have implemented cashless bonds. And so I'm moving with some statistics to try to determine if we went to that scenario, what it would look like here in Cuyahoga County. I've told my judges at the last judges meeting I'm going to start taking statistics, and I hope that the new administrative judge, as he noted, taking over, he would want to move forward in the same fashion that I want to move forward. And so I strongly support cash. There are some who need bonds based on levels of and the seriousness and recidivisms that need to be weighed, but could a majority of our inmates report and be back to us without having to post a bond? I believe that model is something that I want to move Cuyahoga County towards. And even though I'm stepping down as the administrative judge, I've told those on my bench, including our new administrative judge, that I'm not going to sit around and be quiet.
Do we currently take into account an individual's ability to pay when imposing fees and fines? Do we currently do?
We do not. So we're not looking at the economic standing of an individual.
So do we currently offer payment plans or community service in lieu of payment?
Again, so I apologize. In lieu of a payment or payment of their bond?
Payment of their bond.
We do not. There are bond agencies that take percentages.
Do we offer any type of exemption waivers based on poverty?
We do not at this time.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Ms. Baker.
Point of clarification, we get weekly totals of how many are in our jail. And the 1026 to, or 1020 to 1026, we had 1848. We were told that 1700 is the max, and that we would really like to be below that because of the turnover and changes that happen, that we want to not be at the max. So the number of 1848, is that a number that you're comfortable with at this point, or you didn't say that is where you think you should be?
No, I'm not saying that we stand pat what the number today is or being at rated number as well. I think some of the changes that we've made with with the general division and hiring a staff member to look at our jail list. Just recently, we put together a group that gets together every 2 weeks to look at the jail numbers that consist of the prosecutor, public defender, the court, and the jail staff, Mr. Kochevar. So we're implementing ways of looking at those numbers to make sure that those numbers continue to decrease in any way that the means are possible with the court. And just to be, there are times that, and I just speak to the Sheriff O'Donnell, who, he and I spoke this weekend twice, and we were able to release 2 people because of entry. So there is a continual eyes on those who are in our county jail, and both from the stakeholders as well as my bench.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Councilman Gallagher.
Judge, before you go, I just wanted to thank you for your leadership. It's not always been easy. It's sometimes been difficult, but I understand how tough your job is. Sometimes being a judge is the most thankless job out there, and people just think that you wear the robes and it's all this fluffy thing, and it isn't. John B. Corrigan told me one time, I'll never forget it. He goes, Michael, you know why we sit up high? So people can watch us. And I always remembered that.
Yeah.
So I wonder how sane Judge Sheehan is after seeing you. You were a vibrant young man when you took over. And now you're going out an elderly statesman.
He said, hey, look at that hair the judge used to have, and he doesn't have it after 6 years.
Well, good luck.
Well, thank you. I
Good
appreciate
luck
it.
and Godspeed, and we look forward to working with you and Judge Sheehan.
Thank you.
Is Judge Sheehan the new administrator?
He is. So he was elected a couple weeks ago as a new administrative judge.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, and thanks again.
Okay, next we have presenting on behalf of the Juvenile Division, the administrative judge of that court, the Honorable Kristen W. Sweeney.
Good afternoon.
Welcome to the hearing.
I'm bringing up Mr. Jim Ginley in case you have questions about specific numbers. I want to thank you for your attention this afternoon to discuss the juvenile court's budget for 2020 and 2021. I am confident in telling you that the amount requested represents the amount needed to safely and effectively run the detention center and the courthouse. Some highlights I would like to bring to your attention include, for the first time in its existence, the court has begun seeking reimbursement from the federal government to cover the medical expenses of youth in the detention who are Medicaid eligible. Additionally, the court is committed to carrying over $2.6 million of previously encumbered special revenue funds from 2019 into 2020 to assist the county. You will recall in 2018, the court agreed to use these special revenue funds towards general and HHS funds shortfalls. Concerning the detention center, the additional funding requests focus on keeping the facility safe and orderly. And some of these innovations, I'm trying to address your 3 questions in my comments themselves. We need to hire a psychiatric nurse for the detention center. 50 to 70% of detention center residents are on medication. The goal is to have the nurse ensure that meds are properly taken and observe the behaviors, thus reducing violence and self-injurious behavior. Also included is a one-time fee to establish an electronic medical records link between the detention center and university hospitals. The goal is to reduce hospital visits and ensure better care. The court is also exploring telemedicine options. Additionally, 2 human resources positions will be used in large part to reduce overtime costs and curtail inappropriate pattern call-offs and absences in the detention center. The 2 positions will also focus on recruiting well-qualified detention staff and conducting background checks to help capture the very best candidates for detention center posts. And then for the first time with the addition, we've requested an additional 10 detention officers. The detention center will be in compliance with the staffing mandates of the Federal Prison Rape Elimination Act and the Juvenile Detention Alternatives Initiatives. I would like to thank Jim Ginley for his help over the summer and the fall, and Prosecutor Mike O'Malley for allowing us to work with Mr. Ginley. I would like to thank the Office of Budget and Management and Maggie Keenan and Wendy Fain for their help and consideration. And again, I would like to thank you very much for your time and attention. I too am stepping down as the administrative judge of juvenile court, and Judge Tom O'Malley, who is present here today, will be stepping up into that position. He's a very lucky man. I want to thank you for the work we've done together over the past 6 years for with the mutual goal of the safety for the children and residents of Cuyahoga County. I feel like I've been here several times over the years. I feel like I've always had a receptive audience. I've always been treated with respect, and I greatly appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that presentation. And Your Honor, for clarification, the 4 items that you mentioned, the psychiatric nurse, the medical records link, the 2 human resources personnel, and the 10 additional detention officers.
Yes.
Are any of these items currently included in the budget as presented, or are these all items that would be additional to what is currently in the budget?
Councilman Miller, those are all new items. The psychiatric nurse would be hired inside of the UH contract. It's additional funding we're requesting. The same with the medical records. That's additional money that we're asking for in a budget category for certification for that contract. And then the other items are the 10 detention center officers. Those are in addition to what would be considered a full complement. So those are new, and the 2 HR personnel are also new. Those 12 positions are all general fund.
So none of these positions are in the proposed budget that came from the administration, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, and for each of the items, have you worked up any cost estimates?
I have, and in fairness to Gene, I only electronically sent everything maybe 2.5 hours before we arrived. And I do have, it's in the handout, we have isolated costs for the salary request. We have like 6 index codes that are active that we're asking for additional monies, and they're listed in part of a narrative on those sheets. I don't know if you have them, okay?
Is this the item you're talking about?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. And what's the total amount of the proposed increase?
The general fund component is slightly under $3 million.
Per year?
Yes, and that
Okay.
includes 12 of those 13 positions, because the other one is in the psychiatric UH contract. And then the levy increase is just under $500,000.
And the positions in human resources, would those positions be actually within the court, or would they be at human resources but work for the court?
Well, they're not in the detention center. They're in the juvenile court judge's budget. There's a whole
Okay.
grouping of budgets, and that's a general fund account.
Okay, understood. Questions by my colleagues? Councilman Gallagher.
So these items were requested and denied.
Yes.
Okay. Ms. Conwell?
Through the chair to Judge Sweeney, could you just tell me a little bit of why you need the 2 HR personnel?
We are constantly, we have a lot of staff churn. A lot of the same issues that you were talking about with the county jail also exist in juvenile detention. And so we have a lot of people who leave, and then we have a lot of people who apply, and I'm really not interested in taking any risks in hiring somebody who should not be hired because of stuff that is lurking in their background as a time bomb. And we've had some issues with that, candidly. And so I want to make sure that we are hiring people who really want to be here and who are safe when they are going to be working with an extremely vulnerable population who are literally locked in a facility. You know, that's a very vulnerable position to be in. So these human resources positions are necessary to make sure that there's not some file out there in some previous employer that's not listed as a personnel file that we don't know about. One of the things that has slowed us down in being able to hire is that as people lawyer, and there's a lot of litigation about human resources stuff. So people are creatively like putting stuff in other files. We need to find that out before we feel comfortable hiring them.
And so how many HR personnel do you have now?
I think we currently have about 5. Is that right? We have 5, that's for the entire court and the detention center. And we have about 525 roughly employees.
Okay. So these new personnel that you would like to add to the budget, they would also look at current employees as well, backgrounds?
Well,
Or just new going forward?
I would defer on answering certain human resources position. I brought my whole team back here. You know, if you want to, I know that I'm happy to have someone come up, Mr. Major.
Yeah, because we recently had fingerprinting. We had a grant that was came down kind of from the state that we had to fingerprint HHS employees. And I remember having a conversation with Administrator P, that since we had funding left over for that should be opened up for other personnel to make sure that they did the background checks. But
Go ahead.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Council. Mark Major on behalf of Juvenile Court. That is an active consideration we're doing right now in terms of doing a 10-year look back for all the current employees we have. We're trying to assess what that looks like and how long it would take. That's a monumental task. It's on our radar. I can tell you going forward, we're going to do it with the new hires, and we're certainly looking at it for the existing employees.
okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilman Tron.
Thank you. Your concerns about HR and identification, what kind of things are coming out, and would any of those have been things that you would have anticipated could have been identified on the application itself had we had an application calling for disclosure?
Could you, Mr. Schron, would you mind
Yeah, we've
repeating that,
reduced
please?
our disclosure information on the application. I'm just asking whether or not felony convictions and things of that nature would have shown up had that not been taken off of our application. More of a question, because we wrestled with this when we took it off, only to find out that perhaps later down the process, after you've done a lot of time and energy and efforts, it might have shown up.
Sure, I can answer that, Mr. Schron. In terms of employment at juvenile court, the Ohio Revised Code mandates there are certain offenses that someone cannot be convicted of and be employed with the court.
Okay, could you give me an example of those?
It's in the Revised Code, I believe it's section 109, and the list,
Sex offenses.
yeah, sex offenses, some of the serious felonies, there are some serious misdemeanors as well that would preclude employment at juvenile court. Part of the application process is we do in fact run a background check through the state of Ohio, which accesses leads, and we have information relative to any convictions and any offenses that would prohibit employment. I think more of what we're talking about here are the creative methods, and we've been stung by this, as Judge Sweeney mentioned, the creative methods that lawyers are going to hide different problems with employees. They do settlement agreements. They don't call them settlement agreements. They call them something else. They don't put them in the employment file. They put them in something else called the litigation file. And if you don't know what you're asking for, and if you don't ask for the entire kitchen sink, you don't get what you need. And then what happens is when you do ask for everything, you get a mountain of evidence or a mountain of information that you have to sort through. Incredibly time consuming. And there's a certain amount of degree of skill that has to go through in sifting through that information to see what you're really looking at.
I know that there were 2 areas I believe that a lot of us were concerned about when we took out the disclosure information. One, which was the juvenile setting of employees, and the other was in financial within our record keeping, as far as if felony convictions of that nature were taken off the application of that nature. Would any of that be of any value to shortening up this process? Because you're not going to do the background check until after you've already made the application acceptance, and the person's probably already been awarded at least the job on a probationary basis until you do the background check, I assume.
No, actually, Mr. Schron, we do it the inverse of the way you just described it. For the exact risk that you just posed, We don't put them on until we know exactly who we have, because the risks are just too high.
Not putting them on, but offer the.
We don't offer the job either.
That's interesting, okay.
Well, it slows the process down quite a bit, I'll tell you that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Ms. Simon?
Just for clarification, I think my colleague's speaking to ban the box that the council implemented and put in our HR, but that doesn't even apply to the courts. Our internal ban the box ordinance did not apply to the courts because of ORC, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, just for clarification.
Okay.
The second question I have, and it's follow-up to Councilwoman Conwell, I want to get into the actual Department of HR. How many, you talked about personnel, I think being 5. How many at the top? You have a director, do you have assistant directors? What's going on there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We have a director, we have a deputy director, Sandy Spilker, Kristen Carino. We have Janine Dahm, who also works there. We have someone, Michelle Campbell, who runs the payroll.
I feel like we're missing.
I do too. We have a couple. Yeah, we have a couple. Ann Daniel also assists on a part-time basis. Mm-hmm.
I think what we'd like to see is exactly that chart to see the positions, what the funding, the pay is for each position, and how the need for 2 versus 1 to handle this would be justified.
We're happy to make that information.
Absolutely, and if I can elaborate, please. The second position, the one position is the one we've described relative to the background. The second position is going to be hired in large part to control overtime expenses, sick and call-off and vacation call-offs in the detention center. So that's going to be the role of that second person. And the hope is, and we had made some strides with Chuck and Greg and Maggie in terms of reducing our overtime in the detention center. The hope is to carry that forward with this additional person and to keep nibbling away at this overtime problem we have in the detention center. We've seen some patterns, call-offs, some things that concern us relative to staffing levels. It gets very expensive when these things happen. So we're trying to address this with the second person.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question for Judge Sweeney. First of all, thank you for your work coming in here as the administrative judge and with issues at the detention center. I remember clearly that we had to address.
Yeah.
The question I have is, and you probably need to get back to us with this, is the amount of, there was a fee increase for filings for parents or grandparents. Is that, I would like to know how much that's yielding for the court and
the amount?
addition, and you'll need to supplement this.
Yeah.
Because I'm not sure if you're aware that some of the grandparents, some of the parents cannot afford to pay a filing fee for multiple children versus a fee for each case number or each case. It's becoming prohibitive for people to get justice because of that. I know you have an affidavit for poverty, but it still seems to be not well known to people. So I'd like to know how much of an increase the court has seen as a result of these fees.
So in terms of amounts, we will have to get back to you. I will say that the judges are very aware that this does create an access problem to justice, and we did suspend fees for children from the same set of parents. So for motion filings, certain kinds of motion fees where it would just add up for each child, continuances, so that rather than having to file continuance fees for 5 children, it's 1. So we are working on that. It's a terrible pull trying to be responsible and you know, with county dollars, and then also trying to offload those costs onto the people who come in front of us who have to choose between paying for the grocery bill and the court fees. We are very aware of that. And I am certain that we are right there together on how this is a problem. It is not necessarily a problem that I have been able to solve.
Judge O'Malley, I guess we'll have to
right.
talk to Judge O'Malley to try to solve it. And thank you for recognizing this. I understand the initial deposit on a complaint
Yeah.
or a new case that has to have a deposit, but every motion, every filing,
Well,
subsequent.
we have actually said we're not doing that.
Okay.
Okay.
Because at the other courts, when a case is pending, for instance, even domestic, once a case is opened up, there's a deposit. You don't need to keep paying a fee and filing fee
Yeah.
every single time you file, and we appreciate exempting motions for continuances
Yeah.
and such. I think this needs to be to be looked at the court.
Okay.
Ms. Baker?
Thank you, Chair. It's always curious when we hear for the first time in existence we're doing something. Why is it that we're just now seeking reimbursement of the federal government to cover the medical expenses of youth in detention centers who are Medicaid eligible? Why haven't, and what kind of dollars are you anticipating to be recovered from that?
I can speak to the first part of your question, and then the second part I'm going to defer to Mr. Tom Rennert, who now is in charge of the detention center. We were laboring under a false understanding relative to the law as it exists. When I first got involved with the fiscal department, I was told, when I asked that very question, that we were not able to do that. And so that's how we did it.
That was my understanding too.
And then when Tom Rennert came on board, he's got 40 years of experience, and we had a conversation. He said, well, I do that. I've done that in Geauga and Portage County for years. And so that's how it started. And I'll defer to Tom at this point.
Council members, the way historically we have operated in the past in other counties, and what I brought to the attention here to the folks in Cuyahoga County, if a child is currently on Medicaid and they're admitted into the detention center, that stays in progress. If a child comes into the detention center and is not currently on Medicaid, then you cannot make application for them. So what we're doing is having parents sign consent to treat forms, also identifying any private insurers that they may have, and providing their Medicaid information. And then we're contacting Columbus to validate that. And if that is valid, then when the child would go to, say, University Hospital for treatment, that form is going with the child during the transport and provided to the hospital. If we were calling for to AccuScripts for prescriptions, AccuScripts has already agreed to either bill out to the private insurance or to Medicaid.
So the second part of my question was, how much do you anticipate you would be retrieving that you hadn't received before, not knowing that you can?
We've just put this into effect in the last few months. My tenure with the court has only recently started 6 months ago. So I don't have a good sense of where we're at with it right now because we had to meet with UH Hospital, and they are setting up a billing system, and as well with the AccuScripts. We have seen some benefit of it, and there's been some reductions somewhere in what I would interpret to be somewhere around 10% so far.
I would think it'd be important to know if that's a large number that you're able to retrieve, and if you get better information to let us know.
Yes, ma'am.
The second question, if you don't mind, again, as a special note, for the first time, the attended detention officers that will put you in compliance with the Federal Prison Rape Elimination Act and the Juvenile Detention Alternatives Initiative, because that puts us in compliance, isn't that something that we need to do or are mandated to do? How is it that we cannot have the appropriate detention officers if we are trying to stay in compliance?
As a result of the report from the Children's Law Center that was submitted, I believe in September of last year, from Mr. Mark Soler and the Children's Law Center, there was identified issues falling under the Juvenile Detention Alternative Initiative, as well as under the PREA Act that have been being addressed, and there was a priority suggested by Mr. Soler. We're working on the first 8 priorities. We've added some additional priorities to that we're working on toward the end of this year to make corrections to that. The 10 detention officers, the state of Ohio Administrative Code requires a ratio of one staff for every 12 residents. The Juvenile Detention Alternative Initiative, which the court is now part of, has a ratio of one staff for every 8 residents. The PREA Act also has a 1 staff to 8 residents during waking hours and 1 to 16 in the evening and when they're sleeping hours. The JDAI is 1 to 16 during sleeping hours, which is significantly different than what the Ohio Administrative Code prescribes, which is in the evening 1 to 25. So we're trying to come into making those adjustments.
So just to be clear, if we were inspected today and someone walked through your jails and said, you are not, would they say that we are or are not compliant with what is needed in detention officers that we now have on staff?
We would have compliance issues.
And compliance issues just to this or to other?
Correct,
To
to the staffing levels.
And was that made clear to the executive when you asked for those 10 detention centers and it was detention officers and you were denied?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
To follow up on that, is the staffing number that you're trying to reach, is that simply an accrediting body recommendation or is it a state requirement?
The state requirement is the Ohio Administrative Code, sir, which is the 1 to 12 ratio. The court in, I believe, a few years ago were one of the pilot agencies with the state of Ohio to conform to the Juvenile Act for Alternative Initiative, with the idea that throughout the state, they want to reduce the amount of folks in detention centers statewide, try to remove anyone who may get better services and was inappropriately in a detention center or could benefit from services outside of a detention center without being in a detention center, and reduce that. And it's kind of multifaceted. It goes directly to your population, which is influenced from external forces, which would include police, admitting children to the detention center, the courts admitting to the detention center, what your daily population is. So your staffing, it all is kind of in a flow constantly.
Yeah, actually, can I speak to that? One of the challenges of working with this particular population is that our detention center population goes up and down a lot. And juveniles tend to commit crimes in groups. So you'll have, a group of kids come in, and so suddenly you've gone from 90 kids in the detention center to 120 youth in the detention center. It's very hard to staff for that. For example, a couple of years ago, we had 150 kids in the detention center nearly routinely. At one point this summer, we were down below around 90. And now we're back up somewhere between 115 to 120. And the judges and magistrates have worked very hard to reduce this population down as much as we possibly can. But like today, we have 116 youth in the detention center. We have 21 of them have been bound over. That does not count the population who are in the process of having their bind over motions determined. We have 19 youth who are 18 years or older. We only have 8 misdemeanor youth in the detention center today. So, we're trying to keep this down as much as we can. The judges are working really hard to move these cases along. One of the things that's causing us problems, for example, is the medical examiner's office is backed up. So when we have to have a case hearing, if it's a murder or they're supposed to do the investigation, that slows us down because we have to have the evidence. So it's a challenging, complicated issue that we're working really hard to address.
How many do you have capacity for structurally?
Structurally, the building was built to house 180.
180.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anything else? We have Gallagher followed by Toomey.
Got the same question.
Yeah, I believe so. Sir, your testimony, going back to Mrs. Baker's question, I don't think you answered it. State of Ohio comes into your jail today. Are you in compliance
With the numbers of
with the law?
Yes, with the Ohio Administrative Code and a ratio of one officer to every 12 residents, the answer to that question is yes.
Okay,
That is
so,
compliance.
so we're in compliance with the law. This other organization, I assume that came in and we paid money to, or you paid money to tell you you
We
need.
actually did not have to pay
Oh,
money.
you didn't? Well, they're asking, I think I would love to have a taxpayer organization come in and evaluate some of these things, which I think is why I'm sitting here. This is a want on your part. It's an ideal on your part. The state law is the state law, and we're in compliance with the state law. That's what I'm hearing.
Correct, sir. Yes,
Okay,
sir.
that's all I need.
But let me just say, so one of the things, I have been here a couple of times after some things that we would all rather not experience. And so, to make sure that that stuff doesn't happen again, we've implemented reforms like trying to incentivize positive behavior, behavioral management system. I mean, that's basic DH 101. We're struggling to do that because we don't have enough staff. So like, for instance, one of the things we're doing is if you behave yourself, you get to go to bed at a later time. Now, this may not sound like much to you and me, but if you're 16 years old and you're in detention, it's a big deal. But we are not able to do that because we don't have the staff that would allow some of the kids to be out in the common area, and some people are locked into their sleeping cells. And I will just tell you that, we have the kids, 74 of our youth have been in the detention center for more than, it's a long time. People get really squirrely. We're increasing our risks. I'm just saying, there's a reason we're not just coming to you asking because we think it sounds like a nice idea. I mean, there are some serious safety concerns with some of this stuff. I just don't, we really want these kids to be safe. I want our staff to be safe. I want the detention center staff to not worry about being assaulted. So I hear what you're saying. I just don't want it to be like we're just coming in here. You know what I mean?
Well, I'm not saying that it's easy.
Yeah.
And from our perspective, it's not easy.
I know.
Because we're
I know.
unfortunately calling balls and strikes.
Yes.
And there's other people with other programs, and I get that. And money is finite, and it is taxpayer money. And I will tell you, Judge, when you start saying things about these residents and children and incentives to be good, the taxpayers don't like that. They don't like that. These are offenders, and they're getting incentives to be good. It's a fine line. It's a fine line. But as far as the law is concerned, I am happy to know that we're following it. And that's what I would look at. And if there's extra money, and I need a definition on that, I've been in elected office 19 years, and I've never got a definition of what extra money is, then maybe we can do something. But good luck.
So, Judge, my comment is just that I'm wary of accrediting bodies. I'm more interested in your own reports on what your operational needs are, and that I take very seriously. Anything else? Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Thank you. Judge, I'd like to come back to Councilwoman Sunny Simon's questions around the cash payments and inability of the parents to pay. There's so many things in this county. It's a subject that wasn't even on my radar.
Yeah.
And you mentioned it was something that you maybe didn't have all the answers to. And again, I am no expert, so I'm asking you just to kind of vet some of these questions that I have. The question is, states that do continue to charge fines, should they consider setting low caps on fines or assessing fines only after a determination of ability to pay?
So I myself do not find, except in extraordinary circumstances, I think juvenile court, typically, we do not fine people for, as a way of punishment, because the person who would be paying that fine is not the person who did the, the crime. We feel it's better that kids would go do community work service. I mean, even our restitution program, for a long time, we had a $400 limit through the Victim Aid Restitution Program through the Ohio Department of Youth Services, where if you had to make somebody whole, you could go work that off and they would get their restitution that way. Because we want victims to get restitution, and we are not going to put people in detention because they can't pay. We just don't. We just do not do that. So we'll use fines in traffic court, which, I mean, generally, if you have a car, you probably can afford your speeding ticket. But in terms of the delinquency docket, that's not a common or a practice at all.
Not a practice at all. Excellent.
Because it doesn't address the need of why they're coming there in the first place.
Did I hear you say community service?
Yeah.
What did you mean? Or
Well,
how is that used?
you go pick up trash, or you go volunteer somewhere with the animal shelter. You do something to positively give back to the community. You make the community whole.
We're starting to get outside of budget and into general operations.
I think Sonny had something, and I had one on the
Do you have anything else? No, okay.
Mr. Chair, thank you. Just a point of clarification, the fees that I was speaking to were civil versus criminal, or not criminal in juvenile court, but it's civil, custody and child support actions, different from delinquency. We can talk off, go through that later.
Anything else? Ms. Conwell.
Through the chair to Judge, the fees that we were talking about, that Councilman Jones was talking about, does that stay? You said they go away if they don't have the ability to pay. That doesn't determine if they stay in. But where does those fees go? Do they
Well,
stay
we don't
on?
actually assess them.
Oh, you don't assess them at all? Okay.
And we don't have bail at all in juvenile, except if you've been bound over under very specific circumstances where you're facing adult prison consequences, adult consequences. We don't set bail. We don't assess that kind of stuff.
Okay.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Okay, we are now going to have a short break. We've only done 3 out of 8 presentations, but I'm optimistic that we've done the heavier lifts for the day, so I think we're still okay. And we're going to come back at 5 minutes of 3. 5 minutes of 3. Thank you.